In a quiet rural village lived a man named Patrick and his 10-year-old daughter Nathasha. Tragically, Natasha's mother had passed away during childbirth. Patrick and Nathasha shared a deep bond, doing everything together and finding joy in each other's company. Their life was modest yet comfortable, as Patrick had built their home before marrying his late wife. Although they weren't wealthy, they had enough and were content, admired by their neighbors for their strong connection. Nathasha attended a well-regarded local school, where her diligence and intelligence earned her the admiration of teachers and classmates. She eventually completed her secondary education, and one day, while walking in their small backyard garden with her father, she suggested he consider remarrying. She hoped for a sibling to play with and someone who could take care of both her and her father. Patrick hesitated, explaining that he had promised Natasha's mother he would dedicate himself entirely to raising their daughter and feared someone new might come between them. But Nathasha reassured him, saying she was old enough to accept a stepmother and would do her best to welcome her. Moved by her maturity, Patrick agreed to consider it. Several months later, Patrick met a beautiful, kind woman named Ruby at the grocery store. They connected instantly, and before long, Patrick invited Ruby to meet Nathasha, who was thrilled to welcome her. After a few months, Patrick and Ruby had a quiet wedding and Ruby moved in, quickly developing a warm relationship with Nathasha. But everything changed when Ruby discovered she was pregnant. She became distant and often harsh with Nathasha, sending her on endless errands and snapping at her. Patrick, busy with a small shop, remained unaware of the mistreatment. One day, after an especially difficult interaction, Nathasha broke down and her father found her crying. Concerned, he urged her to tell him what was wrong. She explained how Ruby had been treating her, and Patrick confronted Ruby. Overcome with stress, Ruby went into labor and was rushed to the maternity center, where she gave birth to a baby boy. From there on, Natasha's life grew even harder. Ruby assigned out all the household chores, and though Patrick noticed, he chose not to intervene, possibly swayed by the joy of having a son. Heartbroken and feeling neglected, Nathasha eventually left home, finding solace at her grandmother's village. Her grandmother, her late mother's mother. As soon as she saw me with a small bag, she ran over, embraced me, and welcomed me into her modest home. She made dinner for me and I shared everything that had happened. She listened with sadness and told me I could stay as long as I needed. I felt completely at ease in grandmother's home. I woke up whenever I wanted, and by the time I was up, she had already prepared meals for me. Despite her age, my grandma was still strong, energetic, and an amazing cook. I loved her food, and sometimes I'd go with her to the farm to harvest crops, which we had take to the market to sell. This became our routine, and although my dad never came looking for me, I didn't let it bother me. Grandma made sure I was happy, buying me clothes, and always caring for me. Then one day, Grandma went to sleep and didn't wake up. I tried everything I could to wake her, but it was too late. I wept bitterly, knowing that one person who loved me dearly was gone. I alerted the neighbors, who came to comfort me, and the next day, Grandma was laid to rest. After everyone had left her grave, I stayed behind, crying and calling her name as if she might hear me. A few days later, I packed my things and left her village, knowing there was nothing left for me there. I vowed never to return to my dad's house. I walked for days until I found myself in a bustling city. I took on various jobs to survive, even hawking for Mama Bisi, who sold fruits and vegetables. Soon, I saved enough money to start selling my own fruits. Without a home, I slept in unfinished buildings. One day, after a long day of hawking, I rested on the bench in one of these buildings and drifted off to sleep. I was startled awake by a voice and opened my eyes to see a pretty woman around 30 years old, urging me to wake up. "Who are you? And what are you doing here?" she asked. I was nervous and stammered. "I am Nathasha, ma. I live here." Shocked, she replied. "You mean you're staying in my uncompleted building?" I nodded, explaining that I had nowhere else to go. She introduced herself as Priscilla, but her friends called her Prissy. And she confirmed that after I shared my story, she felt sympathy for me and offered to let me move in with her. Overjoyed, I accepted, gathered my belongings, and followed Auntie Prissy to her home. When I arrived at Auntie Prissy's apartment, I was amazed by how beautiful and well furnished it was. She wasn't married and had no children, living alone with her maid Naomi. Auntie Prissy showed me to my room and I quickly began to feel at home. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months, and I was genuinely happy staying with her. She took excellent care of me. Auntie Prissy owned a large store selling shoes and bags, and sometimes I would help her out there. One thing I noticed was that on weekends, various young women would visit her home. They dressed in a very revealing clothing, short tight dresses, skimpy skirts and crop tops that barely covered them. I often wondered why Auntie Prissy associated with these types of women. By this time, I was nearly 16, but my rapid growth made me look closer to 20. One day, Auntie Prissy called me into her room and told me she wanted to introduce me to some of her friends. I was taken aback. I couldn't understand why she would want to introduce me to her older friends. But I kept my thoughts to myself. She mentioned she would take me somewhere over the weekend, and I felt anxious, wondering what to expect. When the weekend arrived, Auntie Prissy brought me some clothes to wear. They looked exactly like the kinds of clothes our other visitors wore, short and revealing. "These clothes are too revealing," I told her, feeling uncomfortable. She just smiled and said, "Trust me, you will need to dress like this for where we are going." Reluctantly, I put on the outfit, but I felt too embarrassed to leave my room. When I finally stepped out, Auntie Prissy smiled, telling me I looked stunning, but I still felt uneasy. We drove to a mansion where we were greeted by a group of serious-looking men who ushered us into a room with a round conference table. Several men who looked wealthy and powerful, possibly politicians, sat around the table. I was puzzled as to why Auntie Prissy would introduce me to these men, who were clearly much older. Auntie Prissy introduced me as Nat, and the men looked at me with intense interest. "Can she do the job?" one of them asked, and I felt confused, wondering what kind of job they meant. I looked at Auntie Prissy, but she avoided my gaze. "Yes, she can do the job and more," she replied confidently. One of the men then said they would pay 10 million naira if I completed the job. What? I thought, shocked. 10 million naira? For what? Auntie Prissy then negotiated for 15 million, and after some back and forth, they agreed on 12 million naira. I sat there speechless and bewildered as she signed a document they handed her. And when we left the mansion, on our way home, I felt overwhelmed with questions but stayed silent, unsure if the car was the right time to confront her. My mind was racing, but I kept my eyes forward. When we got home, Auntie Prissy sat me down and told me I would be working with the men I had met earlier. I asked her, trying to mask my anxiety, what exactly she wanted me to do for them. She smiled and explained that I would be delivering hard drugs to the clients at the airport and some other places, that she had provided all the details. I was stunned. What? Cocaine? I managed to stammer, my heart pounding. God forbid. I could never do that. I am only 16. I don't even know how, and I wouldn't want to, I said, anger and confusion filling me. Well, dear, you don't have a choice, she said calmly. Those beautiful ladies you see here every weekend, they work for me too. She smiled, and I felt the reality sink in. What have I gotten myself into? I whispered, my head in my hands. I won't do it, I insisted. But her response was cold and unyielding. Then get ready to spend the rest of your life in jail. I will frame you up and you will never get out. But if you cooperate, I will spoil you with everything you could ever want. The choice is yours, she said, her face expressionless. I felt trapped. At 16, the thought of jail terrified me. When do I go? And where is the location? I finally asked, trying to sound resigned. That's my girl, Auntie Prissy beamed. I knew you were smart. She pointed to a black phone on the table, saying it had all the details. Reluctantly, I took the phone and scanned through the information. My heart ached, but I saw no way out. From that day forward, I began working for Auntie Prissy, delivering drugs to our clients and earning more money than I'd ever seen. Before long, I was living in a life of luxury. I drove an expensive car, lived in a spacious apartment, and had a bank account full of money. I spent freely, going to nightclubs, shopping, and enjoying life. By my 20th birthday, I was a wealthy woman, rubbing shoulders with influential people. I had become desensitized to what I was doing. I never worried about the police as Auntie Prissy ensured I had full protection. One day, while shopping at the supermarket, I heard a voice behind me. "Hello, pretty," the voice said, and I turned to see a tall, handsome man looking at me. I couldn't help but notice his charm. "Hi," I replied, quickly returning my focus to my shopping. "May I get to know you?" he asked. "I don't talk to strangers," I said bluntly, then walked away. But he followed me, trying to keep up as I headed to my car. "I mean no harm," he said. "My name is Nelson." He extended his hand, but I ignored it. "I am Nat," I replied curtly. He held out a business card. Without looking at him again, I took the card, got into my car, and drove away, leaving him watching as I disappeared down the road. When I got home that day, I was startled to find Auntie Prissy sitting in my living room. I couldn't help but wonder how she got in. Without greeting her, I asked bluntly what she was doing there. She just smiled. "My beautiful girl, I have eyes and ears everywhere. Surprised how I got into your place? I am Prissy. I get whatever I want." Then her expression turned stern. "Let me warn you about that guy you met at the supermarket. For your own good, avoid him, or it will be your downfall and your doom will come quickly." "Why?" I asked, confused. "Because he's our enemy," she replied, not offering much more. I didn't understand what she meant, but I nodded to make her leave. That night, I lay awake, staring at Nelson's business card, wondering who he really was. Curiosity soon got the best of me, and within 2 weeks, I began gathering information about him. It didn't take long to find out that Nelson was a high-ranking police officer, known for his integrity and resilience. He was tough, unbribable, and dedicated to his work. Suddenly, Auntie Prissy's warning made sense. Nelson was a threat to everything we were involved in. I decided it was best to cut all ties, even tearing up his card to rid myself of any temptation. I went back to my usual work, making hard drugs delivery for influential people across the country, and the money kept flowing in. I thought to myself, life is easy when you have money. I continued living lavishly, often heading to clubs where I'd find different men for the night. I paid them off in the morning and we had part ways without attachment. This was the life I had been leading for years, wrapped up in luxury and freedom, never thinking twice about the path I had chosen. One day, as I was returning from a delivery to Alhaji Bako, a prominent bureau de change operator, I saw a group of young boys beating up another boy who looked about 13 years old. Compassion moved me, so I pulled over and rushed towards them. I asked why they were beating him so brutally, and one of them replied, "He is a thief. He stole some fruit from a vendor down the road." He gestured in the direction where a girl spoke up. "My mother sells the fruit and he owes us 5,000 naira. The boy on the ground, struggling to speak, managed to say, "No, I only took a bunch of bananas. It's 500 naira. But the young girl shouted at him to keep quiet. I sighed and handed her the 5,000 naira, asking the boys to leave him alone. Gradually, they dispersed and I helped the young boy to his feet, guiding him to my car. Once he was seated, I asked, "What is your name?" "Charles," he replied. The name struck me instantly. It was the name of my stepbrother, the son of my father and his second wife, Ruby. My heart raced. "Who are your parents?" I asked. "My dad was Patrick and my mom was Ruby," he answered quietly. "But they are both gone now." I froze, unable to process his words. What happened? I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. He continued, I used to live in a small village called Dawa, but after my parent died in a car accident on their way to a neighbor's party, I ended up here trying to survive on my own. A chill ran through me. This is my stepbrother, I realized. My dad, whom I had thought about countless times over the years, had passed away, along with Ruby. Tears filled my eyes, and Charles stared at me in confusion. Why are you crying? He asked gently. Did you know my parents? Unable to answer, I drove us back to my apartment in silence. Once we arrived, I invited him in and prepared lunch. When we sat down, I explained everything to him, that I was a sister and that our father was the same and that his mother, Ruby, had once been like a second mother to me. Together we cried, overwhelmed by the twist that had brought us together again. I promised him that he was family and that I'd take care of him from now on. From that day forward, Charles lived with me. I enrolled him in school and made sure he had everything he needed. He was sharp and clever, traits we had both inherited from our dad. I continued with my usual deliveries, though I kept my work a secret from him. I wasn't proud of what I did, but I felt it was the only part I had at the time. One day, after returning from the salon, I ran into Nelson again. He recognized me immediately and called out, Nat! I quickened my pace, but he caught up, slightly out of breath from running after me. Wait, he said. I stopped reluctantly and turned to him. What do you want? I asked, feigning annoyance. Calm down, he replied. I just want to get to know you better. Let's sit down somewhere just for a chat. His easygoing tone made me pause, and after some hesitation, I agreed. We ended up talking for hours, and to my surprise, I realized it wasn't as intimidating as I had first thought. Soon, we were seeing each other regularly, talking, laughing, and sharing bits of our lives. I found myself falling in love with him, despite Auntie Prissy's warning. Nelson never asked about my job, and I kept it hidden from him. One day, Auntie Prissy confronted me. She had found out about my relationship with Nelson. After everything I warned you about, she said coldly, I admitted I was in love, and she dismissed me with a warning. If anything happened, I was on my own. But I didn't care. Nelson and I became serious, and soon we were planning our wedding. I knew I couldn't keep working for Auntie Prissy. I went to her house to tell her I wanted out, that I was ready to leave this life behind and start fresh with Nelson. She laughed bitterly. There is no quitting in this business. If you insist, you will pay with your life, she said with a chilling finality. I left her house that day, shaking, realizing how deep I'd gotten in this dangerous world. That night, Nelson noticed my anxiety. After dinner, I broke down in tears and told him everything: my involvement in drug trafficking, Auntie Prissy's threats, and my fear for the future. To my shock, he simply smiled. Do you really think I don't know what my fiancé does for a living? He asked gently. I knew about your work from the beginning. I have been keeping an eye on you because I knew you were forced into this. I was stunned. Nelson explained that as a police officer, he had known about Auntie Prissy's operations for a while. He had even protected me from being caught on several occasions, diverting investigations so I could stay safe. I am in love with you, Nat. I knew you wanted out, and I want that for you too. Investigations are underway, and soon Auntie Prissy and her network will be behind bars. I was speechless. But what about me? I whispered, guilt-ridden. I have been involved too. He reassured me. I will protect you. We'll get married quietly, and then you and Charles will leave the country until this is over. I will join you afterward and we'll start a new life together. Overwhelmed with relief, I could only thank him through my tears. True to his words, we married quietly 2 months later. Our honeymoon was filled with joy and peace. I'd never felt so free. Weeks later, I found out I was pregnant, and Nelson was thrilled at the thought of starting a family. With everything in place, Charles and I relocated to Canada. where we waited for news. Not long after, Auntie Prissy and her associate were arrested and sentenced to life in prison. Nelsie joined me in Canada soon after, just in time to welcome our daughter Elizabeth into the world. Charles thrived in Canada, pursuing his education and eventually becoming a doctor. He met a wonderful woman named May, and soon they were married. Later, welcoming a beautiful boy into their lives. I looked back on everything I'd been through with gratitude, knowing that without Nelson's love and support, none of this would have been possible. Our lives flourished in our new home, far from the shadows of our past. We had built a family and found happiness. And I knew in my heart that this was the life I was always meant to live. The end.